I'm sorry?
I see 4 pairs of glasses on your desks.
Yes. My reading glasses sort of tend to form herds and follow me around. Because I'll grab a pair and stick them in to make sure I have a pair, and I'll do that like 2 or 3 times. So the distribution of reading glasses in my life is very lumpy. I will have places in the house, my briefcase, whatever, where there will be none. I went shopping the other day and discovered to my horror there were no reading glasses at all in the car. And so I was shopping and looking at stuff like this, trying to read labels. Yes, I reached in to get out a pair of reading glasses and discovered there's 2 here, there's 1 here, these are expensive glasses. So anyway. This is payment. This is payback because I mocked my wife about 10 years ago when she started using bifocals and so on. And about 7 years ago, my own reading vision started to go. You know, these 3 principles are so simple. I mean, look at those. Is there anything there that's counterintuitive or non-obvious? You know, get the right people, keep them happy so you hold on to them, and let them get their job done.
The last one, maybe not.
Well, yeah, they're turning them loose. It's, you know, they usually need some supervision. But what is so amazing is, and there are a lot of places that do this and do this very well, and they're usually quite successful as a result. There's more places that just don't seem to understand this. And this is the gist of this whole section of Peopleware. Getting the right people is the thing. And here's the problem. And it's such a cliche, and it's so true in IT, is that often your best people are just a little unusual. And for a lot of organizations, now, how many of you hope to go work for small, dynamic startups and companies and so on? As opposed, how many of you want to work for large corporate or government entities? Yeah? Yeah. Well, you know, if the work's there, it's there. One of the best jobs I had was PricewaterhouseCoopers, where, you know, they had 50,000 employees here in the U.S., 150,000 worldwide. But boy, they paid me a lot of money. Anyway, but the atmosphere you run into will depend upon the company, and in some cases, it will depend upon the management at that moment. There is a tendency in some companies, and I will simply say some companies, that, well, you know, we want people to come in dress shirts and slacks and nice shoes and have neatly trimmed hair, but we want you to work 70 hours a week and do this programming. Companies like that have a hard time hiring and retaining good people. DeMarco, it's the middle of the day, class is going on. They talk about in professional using to characterize surprising or threatening behavior. Remember, in Tempest, I had professionalism as one of my things. But if you may recall, when I talked about professionalism, I talked about you actually do the work. You're not a prima donna, you're not making demands, you show up and do the work. Here, the way they use unprofessional is for people who are, well, I literally, just this morning, was having this chat through Facebook Messenger with a good friend of mine from Colorado. She's in IT. And she's working for a manager. She's trying to move from straight QA to coding. She's very good, but she has a manager who, simply put, is a sexist jerk. And she's very frustrated trying to deal with this because he's, you know, he complained in trying to deny her this transfer, this cross transfer over straight to things. And, well, we've had all sorts of problems with her. You know, we had a problem earlier this summer where she just seemed to be spending all her time in the bathroom. Well, she had an actual medical condition. She went and saw a doctor about. But he's looking for ways to criticize her that have nothing to do with her technical performance and her getting the job done. So the issue in this chapter is that you will, trust me, not all organizations are like that, but you will encounter organizations where there is a real high control needs and outright hostility at times on the part of management. I actually had one job like that, and it's sad because it was one of my dream jobs. A year out of college, I went to work on the space shuttle flight simulators at NASA. And I was actually working for Singer Link, Singer Company Link Simulations, who was one of the 3 prime contractors on it. So hey, guys, I got to fly the space shuttle. I crashed it. I tried doing a loop. I think I still have the printout somewhere of my flight. Anyway, and it was the fixed base. It wasn't the motion base. I didn't get to play around with that. But I quit after 6 months. And there were a few issues that some were endemic to the job itself, but part of it was I have never before or since worked at a company where it was like enemy camps between management and the developers. Management viewed everything the developers did with hostility and suspicion. My first clue should have been when we moved from San Diego to Houston, and I submitted for reimbursement for a relocation. I discovered they had a policy of only reimbursing 90% because they assumed that you were padding your reimbursement receipts. It's like, really, guys? It's not like you're paying me the big bucks. I'm getting, making $20,000 a year here, and you're taking 10% off the top of my reimbursement. So keep that in mind as you interview. Leadership. There is, and I'll say it's a particularly East Coast form of leadership, which is to sort of beat you on the head until you submit. Leadership is seen as how can we extract the most work for the least money and benefits out of the workers. Instead, true leadership is a form of service. You're there trying to enhance the productivity of your developers by making them happy, by getting stuff out of their way. This is why, again, and pardon for talking real world, but it's what I have. At Pages, I've mentioned we had very little turnover. One of the reasons was that when we came on board, Jim Hammerly, who's VP of Engineering, fought for things to basically free up the developers to get the work done that we were asking of them. So we always had a kitchen stocked with, it wasn't fancy, it was soda and M&Ms, peanuts. But it was always stocked. And I had a few discussions with John, our CFO, who said, we could cut funds by doing that. I said, John, if one of our engineers walks out that door, I said, we will lose more in terms of the impact to schedule than all the money you could spend on stuff like this over years. There's a false economy here. And by the same token, we had a standing rule that if 3 or more developers were working past 7 o'clock, we had up at Debbie, who was our office manager, our den mother as we call her, up at her desk up front, she had a folder with menus for all the local restaurants. And if there were 3 or more developers working after 7 o'clock, they could get together, order dinner to be delivered, and the company would reimburse it. Tony Gibson, who I worked for at OSG, often had engagements where he would put 5, 10, 20 consultants in at a corporation for months at a time. And he would go, for some engagements, he'd go a step farther. He actually, for one we had, I wasn't working there, but it was a group who I think were in Richmond, Virginia at Capital One. He actually hired a housekeeper, basically rented apartments for the engineers because that was cheaper than paying for a hotel for months at a time. And he hired a housekeeper who would not only clean their apartments, but would shop for them, would drop off and pick up the dry cleaning, and basically run any errand they had to do because and they never had to worry about it. It was just sort of like a full-service hotel. And all they had to worry about was getting on site, doing their work, working long hours, coming home. There'd be food in the fridge, their clothes would be clean, apartment would be clean. That makes a tremendous difference. Now, Silicon Valley has taken this to an extreme, and I have a whole article, I don't think it's on the list, as to overdoing the perks. I think it really is badly overdone in Silicon Valley, quite frankly, because it burns through a lot of money without getting that much return on it.
And isn't there so much at some of these companies to do that they don't code? Like, oh, we're going to play ping pong now instead of.
Well, yeah, well, yes, and that gets back to managing your developers, yes. Now, one would hope they would actually code, but if you're providing too many distractions, and again, this is sort of the opposite we've talked about, you want to encourage flow. Innovation that happens is unwelcome because it requires change. People hate change, as a general rule. Stop and think what happens every time, say, Apple or Android makes changes to the user interface on your phone. It's like, what are you guys doing? This worked fine before. Why do I have to learn this new stuff? Okay. That happens. The thing is, can't we just do what we're currently doing, but somehow do it better? So as a leader, trying to implement change means that you're going to run into resistance. Hiring people. And we're going to talk about this. We're going to come back to this theme again and again. I think I have already said, yes I have, because we had some discussion of it. Boy, it's hard to hire good people. You can get people who come all the way through and give good interviews, and they just turn out to be a disaster. Speaking from personal experience. And as sad as it is, and I think I've already said this in here, I've reached the point that not only the best, but in some respects, the only real effective way of hiring someone is based on the recommendation of someone whose opinion you trust. Someone says, yes, I have worked with that person, and she's great, hire her. It's like, okay, I can trust that. And some of the best people I've hired that way. Now, part of the problem is that companies are looking for silver bullets in hiring. So you have different fads. You have the fad of, oh, we're going to give you, how many phone books are there in America? And think carefully, and this is sort of some clever puzzle. It's like, that has nothing to do with writing code. It has nothing to do with how someone will perform when you say, we have to get this subroutine working in the next 2 weeks. Mostly it's there to make you feel good about yourself, because I know how to answer that. I'm not a big fan of the implement a linked list in Java here on the whiteboard. You know what you do if you ask me to implement a linked list? I go to my bookshelf and I grab my book I have a number of books that have linked list implementations. Like, yeah, that's what I want to do. I sit and code. And if I'm sure the Java thing, I go on Google and say, okay, Java API this. Okay, there we go, I got that. Aptitude tests that have no bearing. Some of these are psychological, some profess to do technical aptitude, and so on. At Pages, our hiring process wasn't perfect. It got better the more people I hired, because basically what we'd have is any new candidate who came in, every single engineer would do a one-on-one interview with that candidate. And then we would all get together as a team and say thumbs up or thumbs down. It had to be a unanimous vote. And if it was a unanimous vote, we'd hire the person. And that was not necessarily ideal, but it was a sufficient screening to figure out. And like I said, we only had, actually, once that process was in place, there was only one person we hired that ever ended up getting fired. And I've talked to him. He was very brilliant, actually contributed a lot, and then just sort of went through something of an emotional and psychological meltdown over time. Some approaches to consider. As a candidate, come in with a portfolio of work done to date with actual, that should say with, not which, actually, actual examples. You know, much, if you're an artist and you go in, you know, to be hired as a graphic designer or artist, you come in with your portfolio. Here's work I've done, you know, here's this project I did for this company and so on. Yeah, Matt.
How would you critique something like that? I mean, we've talked about code is invisible, so I mean, you can't look at it.
Well, no, if they have source, first thing I do is say, you know, talk to me about projects that you have done that have delivered, and if you can't show me source code, you know, show me screenshots, show me working things, explain to me what the process of the project was in your involvement. If you can't show me source code, that's great. Yeah, let me see your source code. Of course, stick the comments here. I'll clean this up, so on and so forth. Tied to that, ask them to give a 15-minute presentation on some project they've worked on. Do an actual, and part of the point here is, can they describe their project? Can they communicate intelligently what the key challenges were, what their contributions were, what were the lessons learned from the project, and what they would do differently. This last one was one that DeMarco Lister had. I threw this in. If I were trying to hire coders now, I might well do this, which is give them some code that's got some defects and or just, you know, bad design, some obvious flaws, and put them in a room with full access to computer, whatever books they want, and say, okay, you've got 30 minutes, or if it's a longer chunk of code, you've got an hour. Come back and tell me what problems you find with this code. And this is good because something I have seen particularly in the last 20 years is a recurring issue of people who have great looking resumes, who do well in interviews, and they get hired and they don't know what the hell they're doing. You ask them to write code, it's kind of like, really? This is what you wrote? Or it's kind of like, yeah, I just saw that on Stack Overflow last week. So, you know, give them a chance to actually critique code, because that requires them to be able to read and analyze code, which quite frankly, if you're hiring someone to an existing project, that's a lot of what they're going to be doing. You're not going to start them, in most cases, you're not going to start them off saying, write this compiler from scratch. You're going to say, we've got this module over here, here's a list of features and a list of defects. Go to it. Much of my 40-year career has been coming in and having to pick up code that I've never seen before, I didn't write. In many cases where the developer isn't there, and having to figure out what the code is doing and what it's going to take my part in order to rewrite it. Your thoughts, those of you who have either been through interviews or have had to interview people to hire. What have you felt has been effective or not effective? Anyone? Yes.
So I work for the data analyst team on BYU Career Services, and we needed to hire someone else. And so what we did is we actually just took a large chunk of our data and sent it off to our interview candidates and said, bring something back, analyze and bring something back with it. And you could instantly tell who actually took the time to look over it, review it, and analyze it, and who just kind of took a glance at it and tried to come up with something. It was really telling.
That's a great story, thank you. It makes me feel better for having added that in. Yes, Dick.
My current job, I got hired on because my friend recommended me.
There you go.
He looked at my resume for a minute and asked me a couple questions, and I was hired.
Yeah.
Was that?
Was he smart to hire you or get you hired?
Yeah.
Okay, well there you go. See, it works. Yes.
A few jobs back, it was kind of my first real coding job. I feel like they kind of, like I went in and it was something like that where, I can't remember what it was, but it was like, write code that can access this .NET level, you know, kind of like way over my head. Had no idea what I was doing and felt like I just failed it, you know. They came in after and kind of like just talked to me to see how I went about the process, and then I think what really like sold me was that I had like, yeah, a personal project that they just asked and I showed them, and it was like the whole mood changed, because I didn't do very well on what they had given me, but then as soon as they saw that I had done stuff on my own, maybe more in my element, like the whole mood changed, and I think they hired me on this, but it was like a huge switch though, having personal,
Having
like
a personal-
portfolio, like you said.
Yeah, Matthew, then look at the others, yeah.
So I went through in the job that I'm currently at, I refer to it as the 3 trials of the programmer. Because, I mean, you know, 3 interviews with 3 different project leads is what I know now.
Yeah.
I didn't know who they were at the time, but anyway. And they used a number of these approaches, the most common being, well, 2 of them basically had me work out code in front of them, but talking to them. It wasn't, you know, oh, solve this problem. It was, how would you do this? Talk me through what you're doing. And there was one who gave me a piece of code and said, I'll be back later. Tell me what's wrong with this. So, straight up out of that.
And they hired you.
Yeah, they
So
hired
so obviously you did well.
Awesome.
So they're
I had a question about the portfolio.
Yeah.
Is that something that you would print out and say, okay, here's this project in a binder that I've got for you? You can look
Yeah,
through
have something you actually put in their hands. That
Okay.
actually carries some heft.
it? So other than just like a GitHub repository?
Well, yes, you could do something like that. If you've got projects you're working on and so on, but don't underestimate tactile sense. If I come to you with a binder with some tabs and say, here are the projects I've worked on for the last 4 companies, and you flip and there's some screenshots and some talk about the architecture, and here are the technologies I use, and so on. There is something about that rather than here's a link, go look at my GitHub, and they're kind of like, oh, I'm navigating, what am I looking at, what's that? Yeah.
I was gonna say, for my portfolio, I just did like kind of a blog post format, a website called Medium,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of like, I explained the whole story of my whole process, and just so I kind of had links on there that had different things, but with a lot of companies I interviewed, they just loved that because it was explaining them the whole
Yep.
process, communicating that while giving them the explore deeper if they wanted to. But
Yep.
Was
And-
this
and-
a
and-
website you built?
I just use medium.com. It's sort of like a blogging kind of website, but yeah, or you can build your own.
And beyond that, you know, again, we're modern tech, so you know you can walk in and pop with your iPad and plug in your little projector,
Right.
put it up on the wall, and start doing stuff there. Playing well with others, which was a very short chapter. The essence of was DeMarco Lister saying, yeah, women and other ethnic groups are great. Yes, they are. You know, I just had the same friend I told you I had the private conversation with about problems at her work, publicly posted and said she just had, and I think it's the same guy that she's having trouble with, who says, there are no good women coders. This man's an absolute idiot is the repeatable word I can say. And a lot of people, you know, basically said he's an idiot. My comment was, all things being equal, based on my professional experience, I prefer female coders because my observation, my direct experience is that they tend to be more methodical. They tend to take more care with their code. They take longer as a result, but their code works. We're back to sort of what Brooks said, saying most people don't plan to spend half their schedule debugging, but they do anyway. The women who have worked with me or under me almost always produce cleaner and more solid code that works better the first time. One can argue why that is, but that's my experience. But don't grow teams just for the sake of growth. Childhood's end is and there's sort of a generational gap. This is like, you know, me with you guys. I've been at 40 years. He talks about, and I think this is important, there is a tendency, and this is less generational because I have to fight this. You know, I work from home, I have my laptop, and I find myself checking Facebook and checking Twitter, and then doing a little work, and then checking Facebook and checking Twitter, and then doing a little work. I think someone last week, or maybe the week before, mentioned blocking out time where you know, say I'm going to stay off of whether it's email, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, your texts or whatever, for a 4-hour block, and then I'll handle a bunch of stuff. And this is the same point they're making. It's not, you know, if you're saying, okay, I'm going to spend an hour out of 10 hours doing this type of stuff, and I'm not going to do it the other 9 hours. That gives you plenty of chance for focus and flow in your work. If, on the other hand, you're doing it every couple of minutes, it interrupts the focus or flow. Second thing, now this is for all of you going out in the workforce, particularly if you find yourself with older managers. Ask them what they expect from you in terms of performance. And what they're talking about is not, well, I expect you to get the job done. It's along the lines of, well, I expect you to be in here no later than 9 in the morning, unless you have permission to work at home. So, make sure they may have expectations based on their 10, 20, 30 years in work that you don't necessarily have coming in. And so it's a good idea to sit down, and it tends to impress them, by the way. Just sit down with your new boss, your new manager, and say, okay, what are your expectations here in the work environment? What do you want to see? What do you don't want to see, and so on. Actually, it's good to ask it during the interview, because they may tell you things you think, I don't want to work here. So, and then this last point was more directed to people like me. I already joked about how 5 years ago I discovered this phone call versus texting thing with my own daughter. That I could call her all I wanted, leave voicemails all I wanted, and I'd never hear from her, and I'd text her and she'd respond 30 seconds later. So that's more directed towards older people like me. Now, keeping your people happy. We've talked about this some. This is actually one of the issues in the article that Ruby and I did that we talked about last week. There is sort of an industrial management viewpoint where programmers are seen as interchangeable components. Both in terms of, well, it doesn't matter what, as long as they have certain minimum skills, it doesn't matter who we assign to what aspect of the project or who they are, or how long they've been here, how much they understand. And, if they get unhappy and leave, well, we can always hire another one. There's a lot of people out there looking for work. I think I've mentioned the truck factor concept here, which is how many of your key developers can get hit by a truck and you can still bring the project to completion. And this is a very real thing. There are projects, there are projects where if you lose a key developer, if she or he becomes unhappy, if they become sick, if, heaven forbid, they die or whatever, it can cripple a project. Now, if that's, and part of what you want to do is you want to keep your truck number as high as possible. So you want to make sure people are rotating in and out, and you don't have one person who can hold the project hostage, if you will, by making demands and saying, hey, I don't do this, I'll walk. And it's like, well, if that person walks, we're in real trouble. Why do people leave their jobs? There's actually been some recent studies that say, and across all industries, number one reason why people leave their jobs, they don't like the manager over them. A lot of head nodding here, yeah. This is sort of the, this person's a jerk, I'm out of here. You can get a feeling, the loyalty needs to go both ways. You'll find companies where, well, we need you to be loyal, we need you to work in here. It's kind of like, what have you done for me lately? You're paying me a salary, I'm getting my work done, I have no particular reason to feel loyalty. This again is why we're going to have a whole other section for PeopleWare that's going to be on creating teams. How do you avoid turnover? A culture of excellence. You want people to feel like they're working at the best place where they can work. You make investments into the people. Education, seminars, trainings, and so on. You have a clear upward career path. Now, all these things seem obvious, but I'll tell you, you can get a lot of resistance from management in all these. It's like, well, we need to make the next quarter's results. Actually, I think that's on the next slide. you know. So we're going to do that by cutting back on, you know, no more soft drinks in the machine, and no one's going to any conferences, and you can't buy any books, and you have to work 70 hours a week. Boy, you'll lose all your best people, because they'll say, hey, I can find better jobs than this. And this comes to it, the seeing employees as an expense instead of an investment. A great functioning company sees you as an investment. They will train you, they will work to keep you happy, they will give you opportunities to grow. Layoffs are sometimes inevitable. I've been laid off before, I've laid myself off before. No, really, I had just hired, I was working for a very small software company, and given permission to hire another developer to help out with the projects we had, and went through interviews and hired this guy who moved from Boston, and 3 weeks after he joined us, the owner of the company came back and said, our finances suck, you're going to have to lay someone off from your division. Well, it's me or the guy I just hired. And so I laid myself off, and I told him, go find another job as soon as you can while you still have this one. because I don't think this company is going to be around terribly long. Any thoughts or feedback on all these issues?
We go back one second.
Sure.
At the company my dad works at, they do paper boxes and printing, and when they upgraded their printers, they had to train their new guys on the new technologies, because they've been printing since the 80s and used older technologies. And there's a lot of fight back on that, which goes back a couple of slides before, but we can see it very much at the training and seeing them as an investment and building their value as printers is something that keeps them around, and they've been around for a long time with that company.
Yep. Other thoughts or observations on any of this? Yes?
So my dad's worked for the same company since he graduated college. He's been there 25 years now. And the reason he stayed is because every time he was like, maybe I want to go get a new job, his boss was like, and we'll promote you. And so he's just kind of worked his way up. But the last 2 years, he's actually plateaued and actually gotten, like, he was over a team, and they took the team away from him and, like, restructured. So now he quit, and he's going to go find a new job, because he's like, I'm done. I don't want to be here.
And that's an example. And, you know, we live in a volatile industry. You know, of course, my resume is all over the place because, as I said, it's sort of ADHD. Squirrel, hey, yeah, I'll leave this comfortable, secure job and go start doing computer games. Why not? With wife and children home. Anyway, but the point is you need, for success in IT, you need to find, screen for, hire, and hold on to the best people. Because, as I've said, and I will say it repeatedly here, for all these silver bullets, you know, whether it be methodologies, technologies, whatever, the thing that matters most is the quality of your people. If you have a great team, you can go waterfall, you can go agile, you know, you can do Python, you can do assembly language. It doesn't matter. If you have great people, they will write well-designed code. And that is what it's a bit like, you know, if you give Yo-Yo Ma a recorder, he can probably still produce some pretty wonderful music on it. If you give me a violin, it's just going to be atrocious. Actually, if you give me a recorder, it's going to be atrocious. I don't know anything. Anyway, so that's it. Let's take a break till 3 o'clock, and we'll come back and talk some more.